Hi everyone, welcome to the talk, Art Style 101. First of all, who am I? Well, my name is Tomislav, I'm a Croatian, but I live my entire life in Austria basically, and I'm an artist. So, what kind of art you may ask? Well, I specialize in 2D art and animation, and done quite some work freelancing for companies, also versus people. But also since 2016, I'm part of the Monkish team, and started with regular 2D art and animation, and these days I'm focusing on concept art and art direction stuff. Who's Monkish? Well, we are a studio in Graz, founded in 2006, and worked on various titles. Some recent notable ones were Generation Zero, Biology, Microsoft Flight Simulator, World of Tanks, Star Stable Horses, Search Village, and many others. So what is this about? Well, as the title says, it's talk about art styles, and one-on-one, it kind of tells you that it's a very basic overview. It's a huge topic, so I'm trying to make it compact into something that's doable in 30 minutes. So I hope that you guys can understand it. And let's just start with the question, well, does art style even matter in games? No. But actually it does, well, otherwise I wouldn't have a job. But the true answer to this question is it depends. Why does it depend? Well, there are so many different games that just have bad visuals. And I can remember one example specifically where I was in school and people laughed at me for playing this one game. And they laughed until they tried it themselves, and it turned out to be the most successful game ever released. It's kind of like this, it used to look like this, and it looks not better now, I would argue. So the true answer is it really depends, because gameplay matters too. Why does it matter? Well, people or players who usually not drop a game for the bad art, they usually drop it for the bad gameplay. I'm sure most of you can think of a game that looks stunning, but it's just not fun to do. Not gonna name anything, but there's plenty of examples, I think, sadly. So, what is the true role of art? Well, there's many in games. There's two that I want to mention today specifically, since we only have so much time. And the first one, obviously, helps you sell the game. It's the first thing the players see, and hopefully it will spark an interest in them, so it will stand out in the stores to them, and it just looks so beautiful that we'll try it without even knowing what kind of game it is. It might just look so good, they will buy it without knowing the game at all. It also impacts players' mood. I think most artists should know about this, but art can really make you feel a certain way. And that's not only true for games. I think in games it's even emphasized because it's more interactive. But just like painting on a canvas can already make you feel something. And if you're interacting with it and you're in the world, it's much stronger. So that's a very important point in games. So it supports the narrative and your story, but it's obviously a big part of the user experience. So let me just show you two examples. First image, it looks a bit different here, but just imagine you're walking through this field in the game and you see this gloomy purple-looking forest. It's a bit blue here, but immediately as a player you will start to think about the forest in front of you. Maybe you will even start making up a story or some kind of reason why it looks like that, and the path obviously kind of leads you towards it, so along the way you might encounter certain things that will just help you, or just make you come up with your own story and make you feel maybe intrigued or curious. You just want to see what's there, so without much text, you immediately tell the player something's coming up and it might be something special. Another example that I prepared is, well, it's a battlefield or battleground. There's cats in the smoke, even a little horse, and stuff laying around. So, as a player, you get there, you see a horse. There might be someone there, maybe not. Maybe you can use the horse, I don't know. You don't know at that point, you might go there, try it out. It's raining, so the player won't probably be happy about it. He will probably feel some tense, and slowly but surely make his way around the field, start looking at things there, and make his way to the castle. So, pictures already tell a big thing, big story, and if it's a level in the game, you really, well, it's much more emphasized and it's interactive and you can explore it. I think it's a super powerful tool that should be used more often. So now you know why you need a style, how do you choose a style? Well, for the sake of this talk, I would just cover two topics kind of briefly. One would be if you're working with an existing IP, one if you're kind of tackling a new IP. Let's start with the existing IP, because in my experience it's sometimes easier, because existing means existing style. So you have something to work with, and the question then is just in what way can you change it? And yeah, how do you know? Well, you just have to look at what's out there. Maybe it's based on the previous game, maybe you've done the previous game, so even better. But you have to look at everything. It might be based on a movie, a cartoon, a book, anything. So look at everything there is, and then look at what the fans said, because I think that's super important. Maybe it was a movie, and the movie, even though it looks cool, people hated it for the story or whatever. And if you base your art on whatever they, on that bad movie, people will already start to make a connection, and they will not like it before even trying. So it's good to go to forums, social media, YouTube videos, whatever you can find, and just look at what the fans say, because they will ultimately be the ones playing your game, and if they hate it from the beginning, it's probably a bad choice to go with that. But once you know those two things, start making some concept art. Start figuring it out how it should look like, and once you have that, confront the owner of the IP. They might be open to anything, which is good, so you can try all the things. They might not really be open to risk, and you should just do what they have done all these years before, and there's no discussion. But you might be the owner of the IP, so in that case, do whatever you want. It's up to you. You should know best, I guess. We have one example where we work with the Smurfs IP, which some might know. It's a very iconic style. I think it's recognizable worldwide, which means it's all very strict about what you can do. You cannot really play around much. You have to do basically what KO did 60 years ago. Your art should basically look like it looked for them. And there's another example for the cartoon, which I think many people might even know this better than this, but it's not correct in certain ways. The proportions are not always right. Some details are missing. It was just simplified in many ways. Of course, Hanna-Barbera, who made the cartoon, had to simplify for the sake of animation. But we could use as much content as we wanted from the cartoon, but in the end, ultimately, we would have to apply this style to whatever they made in the cartoon. So they were very strict about it, and everything that we had done had to be improved. One game in particular that we worked on is the mobile game Smurfs Village. It was already 5 or 6 years old when we started, so it already had a style guide. And this is basically the first hut I did. We call it unique, because you can place it once in your village, and that's it. It's a unique hut, and nothing else looks like it. I always had the problem that once you zoom out, they all look the same. Any green hut next to it would look basically the same. And we couldn't change the style much, so what would we do? Well, just for explanation, we would only have a like the main hut would be a template, and we just add a different roof pattern and some decoration around it. What we started doing after some time, once we saw what players really like, we added decorations and basically changed the entire silhouette of the hut. The one in the top, it would be super cool animated with the lights in the night, and it would be super nice to look at. The one with the Ferris wheel would move, and just add more things to it without changing the style and make it more interesting that way. We couldn't really do much else. Then we also had to obviously make icons. This is the first icon, or third or second, I don't know. But it basically looks like it came from the comics. Great, has been done all these years, has worked for them. But since our game has a little bit more shaded style and has shadows and highlights, we started to slowly but surely add some highlights and shading to the icons. And not only did it work for the store much better, it popped and was visible much more better if you scroll through your screen, but also players started using those as their profile pictures. So every time we would have Christmas, they would use the Christmas pictures. And yeah, they would reuse them, and to this day, we sold the game a few years ago, they still use those icons. For me, there's enough proof that this really worked, and it was a great choice to do. And one more example. This is what the cutscenes look like, the background for one, the dialogue will be placed on top of it. Also basically looks like it came directly from the comic. Nothing bad about that, but we started testing internally and made something like this, which in my opinion looks a lot better. Nothing said ever happened because it's out the game, but it's also not that far-fetched because they actually do have a comic that looks like this. In my opinion, much more beautiful and only has a few issues because it's based around these monsters who were introduced with the latest movie. So we kind of wanted to go that direction. So I'm quite confident it will work because the fans really like it. Always have to look at what the fans like. Then, well, let's start thinking about the new AP. We want to start with something completely new that has not been done yet. So you have to ask yourself certain questions. One of these questions would be the genre. What kind of game are you making? So chances are that, let's say you're making a horror game, you probably don't want a low poly cute chibi person. I mean, maybe you want, and then you could have the next viral hit because it's so unique, nothing's ever been done like that. But that's a huge risk you're taking, so it's up to you. But the best way would be to just look at what other games have done and what has worked for them, and then start to pick out certain things that could possibly also work for your game. And another big point that sometimes gets ignored, you have to consider your team. Who are the people you're working with, and what are their strengths? Well, another example, if you basically always have worked on chibi, cute, low-poly characters, and now you suddenly want to make a hyper-real game that uses, I don't know, just a hyper-real game, it's enough. Chances are they might not be able to do it if they spent the past years just doing cute, low-poly stuff. I mean, they can use meta-humans, great program, great stuff, but what if they need to create animals or some creatures or any assets that's just as real as those, then you run into problems. So don't do things that the team might not be always cool with. Another point, that they should be cool with it. So what do they want to do? Like, chances are, if they have fun working on the assets and the art, they will also have a great time working on the game, and you might have a product in the end. Those things considered, you also have to know if it's feasible. Because artists like to imagine something great and amazing, but it might not be doable. It might just be too much work for the time frame that you have, and might just be too expensive. So the budget is always a big point that has to be considered when picking an art style. Not only the time frame, but of course you have to pay for everything, wages, electricity bills, rent, but also you might need new people, because if it's something that's just more ambitious than what you've ever done, you might need new people. Maybe you don't, but then the people you already have to be trained, and that's also time that they spend working on something else but not being productive on your game. But maybe you don't need new people, but you need new tools. That means you have licensing fees, or the people might then need to train on these new tools. It might be new people who need new tools and need training, so all these things combined. So you always have to think of everything together. Like, this is, I think, a pretty short but useful list. But if you kind of know all these things and have a picture in your head that works with all these things considered, you should start narrowing it down. Basically figure out what your style's key features are, like what makes it unique. Everyone always wants to have a completely unique game that's never been done and looks completely crazy and something new. But this is very rare to achieve, and it involves a lot of work. So I'm not giving you a formula how to get to that, because nobody just comes up like this. But it's worth at least having a few things that are unique to your game, maybe within the genre of games that have not been done yet, or maybe they are done in other games, but not in the type of game that you're making. So try to consider what makes your game different from the others. And of course also make sure that it's memorable. Imagine your potential player scrolls through Twitter and sees a friend posting a screenshot, says he really enjoys it, but the next day, the player then goes to Steam, Epic, whatever, sees the game but doesn't remember it. So there's no connection of it being good, but also worth buying. If they know that someone posted it and they remember it because it looks so cool, chances are they will like they will be highly likely to just buy the game. And you will not get to those things without exploration. Exploration is super important, which means you have to gather lots and lots of references. Maybe there's some that are quite identical to what you will do. Then that might not be quite often because then it's not so unique, but maybe there's certain things about that one reference that work for you, but then there's another reference that has other things that might work for you. So gather all these things, make a lot of concepts, sketches, and I also like to say how important it is to test things out. A concept is cool, but if it doesn't work in your engine, it's useless. So it has to work also in the game. You might have a super cool picture of a character doing some cool pose, but from a camera's perspective, with the animation, it might not look that good. So you have to consider all these things and try things out. The sooner you try, the sooner you will know. So also like to just say quickly that if there's no need, please don't rush it. If you have time, try different solutions. You might have the perfect solution for one problem, put it to the side, maybe give several artists the same task, and maybe there's several solutions that are perfect, and maybe you can combine them, maybe there's a use for all of them in some way, but don't just take this first solution. I think most artists should know that even if it works, there's always some other solution that might even be better once you start exploring it more and spend more time working with whatever topic you're tackling at that time. And since it was super successful for certain games lately, consider social media. There are several games, or I've seen studios and artists post artworks without any context, and just start evaluating what the people say, because sometimes you'll see that they really like and positively comment on one artwork, and in the end that has led to some successful games. I think there's even a GDC talk about one game, where they just kept sharing and people would basically pick on their own what they would like to see because they started commenting on Reddit. And you can, first of all, build hype, you build a fan base, which means ultimately there's less risk. You already start building a base of players who will buy the game, but also you get feedback along the way, which means also less risk because you will have less chance of making something nobody will like. So, I know that's not always possible. You can't always share everything, but for indie developers, I think it's more important than from others to not fail and have at least some reassurance that it will work in some way. Yeah, now you know what style you want to have to now put it on paper. Just have it somewhere, because the team always has to be up to date and they need to know what ultimately you're making. So that they need to know about every change in decision, and well, ideally in written form with references and example, but also do's and don'ts. Sometimes there's a few cases which apply, but it's not always, there's only one that's right. So even if it might be correct, like there's edge cases always, so it's always good to have them all noted down, because writing documentation is really hard, and you have to explain everything, but people hate reading, but you always have to be clear with, hopefully with a short amount of text, and you have to avoid contradictions and confusions. In that case, I can really recommend you to just get feedback, go to some people and ask them if they really understand what's meant there, and if not, rewrite it, rephrase it, add more examples, because that's what I want to do next, but artists really love to get images. Add images, add examples. We are visual people, so an image will stay in your mind. If you know this image is bad, don't do that. When you see it in your own work, you will know to not do that. Text rarely stays in your mind. And the point before that, which I know I sit there, leave enough room for creativity. I keep hearing from people in other studios that they don't really like that their guidelines are super strict and basically just follow a step-by-step instruction on how to do things. They like to be more creative. So it's always good to have the most important rules down, but leave the people some space and let them be creative on their own. And at the end, you can always correct them if it's not right. So what is everything? It was written green on the other side, and it's, I think, super hard question to answer, because this heavily depends on the game you're making. I will not make a bold statement and say that realistic games are easier to write documentation for because it needs less explanation. It's a very general thing, like broad statement to do, but generally I think this is kind of right. Let's say you have an artist who's super skilled and can do whatever you want, and you don't tell him anything about the game, but it's realistic. And you just tell him, make 5 different versions of the pine tree and will use it in the game. Chances are he will just go ahead and copy whatever he's seen online, do it, and you can place it in the game. It will probably work better than if you may say, make 5 different versions of a stylized pine tree, and if you have a completely stylistic game, it might just work. So in realistic, it's more likely to succeed. So that's one example, but what is the difference when writing for realistic versus stylized? I know these are super broad terms, but again, for the sake of this talk, let's keep them broad. Stylized is a huge topic, and many different games fall under that, and realistic as well. We know it's super big, but let's just generalize it by saying that for realistic, you basically have to write down everything that diverges from the real world, which means everything that's specific to your game and could be the color palette. Let's say you want a realistic game, but it's a horror game, so maybe you don't want to separate the colors, you want to be separated. It could be based in a fantasy setting, which then means you need to explain everything that's just not realistic in this world, but in your game it is. If you're working on a realistic game on another planet, well then you basically have to explain everything. But you can still use the real world as an example just by telling them how it compares. Like you can say we have rocks right on this planet, but for us it's green. And I don't know, just use examples that are known and maybe go a little bit to the stylistic world, but then have realistic textures and base those textures on something they already know. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about stylized, which I think is the harder one because there's so much room to make things wrong. You basically have to go into every single detail, like what are the shapes and proportions? Is everything kind of elongated and triangulated, or are there round shapes everywhere? Does every level look different? Same goes for like color palette. Could be a completely different color palette for an entire game, or like several levels. It could be very limited, so there's just some colors that you can't use, whereas in the real world everything basically pops up somewhere. Textures, do you even have textures? Like there's recently more and more games which just have a general color placed on top of the model. Or it could be hand-painted texture, very common in stylized games, but it could also be a realistic texture, but a stylized model. So you have to really go into most details on your own, like the world. Is it based on the real world? Is it an alien planet? Is it the miniature world? Is it something we've never seen? Same goes for the characters. Animal, human, alien, some kind of random creature, or I don't know, maybe we've invented something new. Shaders, I think, are more important for stylized than for realistic, because there's just so much room to make things unique with shaders. The game can look completely different just by turning on shaders. It's not that easy, but just shaders can change the look of a game dramatically. So you have to kind of explain and show what they should look like and what they should behave like in different settings. And it doesn't everything else. Depends really on the game, what is unique about the game and what needs explanation. You will be the better person to answer. I just earlier made a quick sketch about how different people might understand things differently. If I told a few artists to make pointy and triangular shapes everywhere, one might make something that's maybe more modern, or like Nordic town, or steampunkish. I don't even know what that in the middle is supposed to be, but if you just give them broad terms, every artist will probably see something else, so make sure to go into detail and explain what you really mean by that. And don't also be happy, like when you have the documentation done, be prepared for updates. I personally like to say that the art Bible or a style guide is never finished, really finished until released. Because things don't just always go the way you're supposed to, and you will always just realize that things are missing which you haven't thought of. Yeah, things may not go as planned, or there might be exceptions. There might be a perfectly good rule, but if you encounter one asset that just doesn't fit into that rule. So there's an exception to the rule, and having all these things written down should help. So ideally, the style should be set in stone, but certain details can change. Which means, if you're 6 months into production, you don't want to suddenly realize that your stylistic aim should probably be hyper-real, which means for the art department, that you basically have to start from the beginning. And make sure to, at that point, just change small details, because, like, even if you change a small detail, you have to consider that every single asset that has been done to that point has to change. And this could add days, weeks, or even months onto your production. So don't just take little things for granted, they can be a huge problem. As we talked about before, it all costs like time is money, basically. So you have to consider those things, even if it's a small thing. And very important again, please communicate every single change with the team. Don't just change things and like expect everyone to know what you've done. So it's very important. And once it's all written down and you're working, you have to enforce. Don't just expect, as I said, don't just expect the art team to know what they have to do, because things will be forgotten. I'm an artist myself, so I know that sometimes you will work on an asset and you just get tunnel vision and you focus into that one single thing that you're just doing, and you will sometimes forget rules. Sometimes you will forget what you're really supposed to do. So you, whoever you may be, an art lead, director, creative person, whatever you are, you should be giving feedback. But not like pointing at things, laughing at it, just tell them it's good, it's great, perfectly great asset, but it's not great for what we want. So point them to the documentation, explain to them why it's not fitting, so they later on know why it wasn't right. They shouldn't be confused later about the feedback. They should exactly know, okay, I was probably thinking wrong, so now it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense in the documentation, if it's something completely new you haven't encountered, use that as an example. Work with them on a solution and just have a before and after. Do and don't, basically. Just tell them yes and no. Like, work with them, and once you have the problem figured out, the next time someone has the exact same problem, you will have it there. Maybe you can even take the second person's problem, which fits there, and use it as another example. So the more you have, the easier it will be to understand. So it's very important to keep those things in mind. So yeah, the more you work on it, well, the more it will be engraved into the artist, and the less you should theoretically worry about it, but still don't forget about doing those things. And the more you work on it, the more you will build a library, which hopefully should save a lot of time, because certain assets can just be reused. So this may apply to something like a texture. If you're working in a 3D game, you might just be able to apply, like, have a little library of textures and just reuse them. Take them and use them for another asset. Maybe you can just adapt a small detail or do simple changes instead of redoing it from the start every single time. This also applies to something like a 3D kit, where you have a little library of little pieces, like Lego set, where you can combine them and make an asset, a new asset out of it. So theoretically, it's not granted, but theoretically, the style then should be somewhat good. It should ideally be perfect, but then you just give aesthetic things, like arrange the things a little bit different or whatever. So then you don't pretty much have to worry about style. Not always the case, but in theory. Also, if you're working on the same theme over and over again, make sure to create some sort of templates. Save yourself work and just reuse, reuse, but also make something that just skips a few steps, and you can just refine it or finalize it instead of remaking it from the beginning, some sort of template. Or animations are a big point. Not every NPC needs their own unique animation. Some do, but chances are if you have a crowd of people, they can basically reuse the same walking animation, running, whatever. reuse those things. Don't let the artist waste time by making 5 different walking animations for one NPC. Maybe you have so much money and you have a big budget game, then it might make sense, would be cool, but you have to sometimes scale things down so they're doable. And yeah, listen to get rules pretty much, reuse, adapt and overcome those problems. And it's not a new concept. Things have been reused since the beginning of games. Pac-Man has reused them. Even Super Mario World has reused tons of assets. Some of us have never noticed those things in the past. So ultimately, it's also all about efficiency. Works more about heart. And that being said, I hope this has been done quicker than I thought, so we were quite efficient. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or outside of the book, which I will spend the next break with if anyone has something.